It's 2-1 for Gary Payton Jr. and the hardest working offense on the globe.
Pod.
It is the most wonderful time of the year, draft season. And in the spirit of draft season, we wanted to look at the 2021-22 Warriors on the precipice of their fourth title since 2015. And we wanted to check out these guys as draft prospects, the key pieces of this recent Warriors run, as well as a couple of the ancillary guys who have emerged more recently. Max, how you doing?
I'm good. It's a little sad that there's only one or two more games left in this NBA season, but it's also fun to be looking ahead to the draft, and hopefully we'll get at least one all-timer out of this last game or two.
Yeah, it's been a pretty cool matchup. Amazing last couple of games of this series. At the same time, I kind of need the finals to end so I can get my last 8 hours of draft tape in, because I feel like I'm about 8 hours of YouTube from nailing this draft class. So let's get right into it. We agreed to start with Klay Thompson, the 2011 Washington State junior, selected 11th overall.
It's only right. We're recording this a day before Game 6. We'll see an appearance of Game 6 Klay, who's shown up once in these playoffs so far. This is also our 6th podcast, so we're hoping for a Game 6 pod. Yeah, it's funny going back to Klay Thompson's draft profile because they kind of got everything right. They just didn't realize how important it would be, was my main takeaway. I don't know if you thought the same thing.
Listeners, gear up for episode 6, Max. I went back into the archives, NBA Draft Net in 2011. The comparison for Klay Thompson was one guy, Marco Bellinelli.
I didn't see that one. I saw poor man's Ray Allen or wealthy man's Kyle Korver.
Wow. Okay. One of the top pure shooters on the college level, prolific outside shooter with a defined role for the NBA level, right-hander who at 6'6" with long arms has good size for the NBA two-guard position, shows an excellent feel having been around the game his entire life. So he's the son of former number 1 overall pick Michael Thompson, 1978. Blazers represent. What was pretty evident in the scouting reports that I perused was people really doubted his ability to become the elite perimeter defender that he evolved into at his peak for Golden State. They mentioned length, but he wasn't extremely long. Good size for the position, but nothing Kawhi-like. And it did look like you said, you heard the Bellinelli, the Korver, poor man's Ray Allen. I think he was pigeonholed as a really good 3-point shooter and not much else. Is that what you saw as well?
Yeah. I mean, there was some mention of he could make things happen in the mid-range as well. I never saw anything that projected him to be a bad defender. I just people didn't discuss his defense in the reports that I read. So it seems like, that prototype of the 3-and-D player, obviously it existed in 2011, but it wasn't as sought after. So, and he might be the best 3-and-D player of all time. Yeah, they said he was limited athletically, so they dinged him. They also mentioned he had a 1-game suspension for marijuana possession, which not super surprising.
Quote, scouts don't seem too concerned about that. Therefore, it hasn't affected his stock much.
Yeah.
Yeah. He averaged 1.6 steals per game as a junior at Washington State. So he was showing early signs of that defensive playmaking, anticipation, and he had the quick release. They called it a quick, concise, fluid stroke and high release, gets a shot off quickly and can do so without needing much space. But he was dinged a little bit for, quote, being an average athlete who plays below the rim. He's a momentum athlete in the sense that he shows solid athleticism when he has momentum moving towards the rim, much better in the half court than in the open floor. Yeah. I think one thing that they really underestimated, and that's NBADraftNet.com, is just how much he would flourish in the open floor, not necessarily as a dribbler and a dunker or a lob threat, but just finding space amid chaos to get open threes that he will shoot at a ridiculous clip.
Yeah, I think, and we'll get to this a lot more when we talk about Steph, but it seems like at this time people didn't really see where the game was going and just how important shooting would become. And a lot of that is because of Steph and Clay that the game went in that direction. But yeah, I mean, best shooter in the draft. I mean, it seems like a lot of these guys get underrated, like Cam Johnson a number of years ago. That was partially because he was super old, but everyone agreed he was the best shooter in the draft. And when the Suns picked him at whatever it was, 12, everyone freaked out about it and said it was a total reach. But there's something to be said for just having a guy who can get his shot off a lot and is really good at hitting it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
When in doubt, take the best 3-point shooter in the draft is a pretty good rule of thumb. And, I just one note, I think that Clay was never, an eye-popping leaper or runner. That became more of a factor when he first came back from this string of devastating injuries. And because he was sort of right above that threshold of where he could really run with the Warriors' free-flowing system and, attack closeouts to complement his shooting threat. The last couple of games have been a nice bounce back for Clay on both ends of the floor.
Definitely. Yeah. And again, looking forward to see what he does tomorrow. He seems to really lean into the Game 6 Clay thing. Like a lot of guys, if there's kind of, a superstitious thing where it's like, oh, in these circumstances, he tends to play well. They're like, it's just, don't try to underplay it a little bit. But he's like, no, I am Game 6 Clay. I've just been waiting for Game 6 to show my true form.
2014 Kansas freshman, number 1 overall selection in the draft, a pick that originally belonged to the Cleveland Cavaliers, traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Maple Jordan, Andrew Wiggins.
Yep.
God, this is let's not get too crazy with the way we talk about Andrew Wiggins now. We're kind of doing the Wiggins conversation at the most dangerous time, but holy shit, he's been fun to watch in this series.
Yeah, it's funny because it took him reaching the finals, it feels like, to actualize everything from his draft report.
Yep.
If we did this 2 years ago, we would be like, they say special defensive potential. It's too bad he never really reached that. Or, his attacking and slashing, it's too bad that all he seems to want to do is shoot long twos and not actually use his athleticism. But it seems like, honestly, it looks like they just showed him his draft report and we're like, do these things, please, because this is what you're really good at. And some of the comps that were in there, Paul George, DeMar DeRozan, Vince Carter, Rudy Gay.
Yeah.
All interesting. None like quite fit, but all interesting. Yeah, it's been wild watching him just transform throughout this season. And even when he made the All-Star team, I thought that was kind of ridiculous. And I think it was because of like a K-pop star. But
well, I don't know. I think it was pretty fair for him to make the All-Star team
as a starter,
as a two-way guy. Yeah, the starting was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But one of the things I took away from this exercise of rereading old scouting reports is like, scouts are pretty smart, and there's a lot of good public information about these prospects on the internet. Andrew Wiggins, 2014 weaknesses. The biggest issue is whether or not Wiggins has the mental makeup to maximize his immense physical gifts. While some scouts are extremely high on him, there are just as many that question his focus and passion for the game. So unsurprisingly, it took Steve Kerr's unbelievable system to galvanize Wiggins to become this elite wing rebounder that he's been in this series, and generally really strong defender that he certainly was never on Minnesota. And, 6'8", I think he had a 44-inch vert at his Kansas Pro Day. He had all the physical tools you could ever ask for, the 7-foot wingspan. He just was like a 4 rebound a game guy for a long time in Minnesota.
Like 2 rebounds a game. I think it was lower than 4. Yeah. And the special defensive potential thing, I remember that was really talked about when he was coming out, because people had questions about his scoring. I mean, he was coming off a tournament game against Stanford where I think he had 4 points. And that kind of raised a lot of eyebrows for people of like, oh, can he do it in the big game or whatever, or his mental makeup. But the defensive potential, and in back-to-back rounds, him going against Luka and then going against Tatum. And I mean, Luka still he was still scoring 30 on plus efficiency, but he was making him work. much harder than anyone on Phoenix did. I mean, Mikal Bridges was in the DPOI conversation, and I think Wiggins did a better job on Luka than anyone else in the Western Conference did this year. And same with Tatum. I think he's done a better job on Tatum than anyone throughout this playoffs has done. And Tatum's gone against some good defenders, whether it's Drew Holiday or Giannis for stretches or Jimmy Butler. But Wiggins has really made him work, and he's been able to combine his sort of strength despite his kind of lean frame, but he's strong and he's muscular and he's really bouncy. And it's just kind of crazy to see, because again, if we did this 2 years ago, it would have been like, oh man, I mean, he's a solid player, but number one and all these tools is just not really translating. But something about, I mean, that Warriors culture and that Warriors system is just so geared towards letting players play to their strengths that he's really kind of found what I mean, all the scouts saw in him all those years ago.
Yeah, obviously not his fault that he was so highly touted and that he was picked first overall. Might have gone differently if Joel Embiid hadn't had such physical red flags.
Yeah.
But, the reports on Wiggins as a teenager were bonkers.
Yeah.
The sky's the limit for him, as he's been blessed with the type of athleticism that does not come along in every class, considered by some as the best athlete to service in 10 years since LeBron James. And I mentioned Steve Kerr, but maybe even more credit goes to Draymond and Andre Iguodala, who seem to be in his ear constantly on national television.
Yep.
Draymond, is barking constantly, and I imagine has made clear to Wiggins, like, hey, I've done a lot more with a lot less. Who knows who Draymond Green would have been with Andrew Wiggins's athletic gifts? He probably wouldn't have the psyche that he does have. And then Iguodala is like, hey man, I was a physical freak too. You have everything I had and more. Yeah. And I'm one of the best perimeter defenders ever. Welcome to my academy. It's time to turn you into a championship player. And it's been really fun to see what that ambiance has done for Maple Jordan.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to the 2014 draft, it's kind of crazy, like the wildly circuitous path he's taken to being kind of maybe not the player he was meant to be, but at least like a very good version of himself. And that was a weird draft because you had a kind of consensus top three of Wiggins, Embiid, and Jabari Parker. And people thought that top three was like a very high level top three, all deserving number one picks. Jabari Parker, who knows what would happen if he didn't tear his same ACL twice.
I could tell you what would have happened. He would have averaged 20 for 10 years, but yeah. I loved Jabari Parker. I took an L there, but again, injuries, not a bust.
Yeah. And if you go back to that draft, I mean, Wiggins, despite kind of, he'd still probably be seen as a disappointment for the number one overall pick, maybe not after this series, but he would still probably go in the top five of that draft. Embiid would still be in the top five. Jokic, who went in the second round that year, would be in the top five. Zach LaVine also. And then I think Wiggins is right there along with Clint Capella, Marcus Smart, Jeremy Grant. Like he's in that group probably at the top of it. So he would still probably be a top four pick in a redraft.
As absolutely wild as it sounds, I actually think that if Wiggins, he's been the second best player on this Warriors team. If he's the second best player on a championship team, I think that he is sort of immediately crystallized as a moderate success. Maybe not for 17-year-old Wiggins, who was viewed as like a bona fide superstar in the making. His stock fell a little bit in his freshman year at Kansas as people started to discuss their concerns over his mental fortitude and his desire to be one of the best players in the league. But I don't know, man. He's been better than Jason Tatum in the NBA Finals, and it's hard now. If the Warriors close it out in 6 or 7, it's just we have to rewrite the Andrew Wiggins story, and that's a pretty cool thing because it was a rough 7 years for that dude in the NBA.
Yeah.
Moving on to the third former prospect we are looking at, the 2019 28th overall selection, Michigan Wolverines sophomore Jordan Poole, compared on NBA DraftNet to Wayne Ellington.
Yep. I Okay, so I was not very plugged into the draft this year.
Yeah.
I looking at his draft profile, I don't understand how he went so low because I thought he became a much better shooter in the NBA, but basically the first line of the report is he can flat out shoot it and he can shoot it off the catch, he can shoot it off the dribble. This is in a post Steph Curry world, so people should theoretically understand that being able to shoot both off the catch and off the dribble is important. Strong ball handler who can create for himself and others. They called him a solid perimeter defender, which maybe didn't translate so much, but it was unclear to me why he fell to 28 with all of those kind of bankable skills. Because that's how I would describe him now, as a guy who can flat out shoot it and create for himself and others. So it was interesting to me that he slipped so much.
Yeah. Really poor defender in college.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't changed. But I think you make a solid point. We've gotten to the point in the growth of the league where a guy who is, 6'5", who shoots threes like he does and can create a shot when needed, like I don't think he'd fall to 28 this year, knowing what we know now. He only averaged 2 assists in his second year at Michigan. He showed flashes of creating for others, but I think really just looked a little bit like a Clarkson-y, I'm going to play on my island, get my bucket, be a bit of a matador on defense.
Yeah.
And he's also become a much stronger ball handler in a couple of years. And I think part of that is just Warriors skill development. Part of that is his work ethic. And he has complete irrational confidence, which has benefited him in a major way. But yeah, he was also young. He was also really young for a sophomore. He turned 20 a day before the 2019 draft. And, some people care about that. Who knows?
Yeah. That's been a struggle for me with trying to evaluate guys this year. I'm like, O'Shea Agbaji looks so much better than AJ Griffin when I just watched the tape, but
yeah,
AJ Griffin's 3 years younger. Anyways, yeah, and Poole's kind of interesting to evaluate him right now because I mean his stock was really high in that Denver series where he was just cooking the poor Nuggets guards because they didn't have their guards basically, besides Monte Morris. And if you pulled people at that time, they probably would have been like, okay, his career is worst case CJ McCollum. Whereas, you get into the Memphis series, he gets a little bit more outmatched physically. The Dallas series, Luka kind of starts to pick on him. In this Boston series, he's had flashes of really, I mean, he's hit some really big shots like end of the quarter buzzer beaters, which help either stem momentum or sort of regain momentum for the Warriors.
Yeah, he should only shoot with 0.1 seconds left in a quarter.
Yeah, he's also had some truly heinous 2-for-1 attempts, which Jeff Van Gundy has pointed out on the broadcast, and you'll see Steve Kerr just like look at him dumbfounded after he goes like double behind the back spin move into an air ball 3 with 30 seconds left in the quarter. But yeah, I'm going to be interested to see next year because honestly, I think the Warriors have a shot to be better next year than they are this year because they'll have a full offseason to figure out how everyone's integrated with Klay and Klay himself getting more time to kind of try to get back to his old self in terms of his shooting and his strength and things like that. So I'll be curious to see next year how the Warriors machine runs, what kind of player pool looks like in the regular season coming off of this playoff success. And yeah, if he puts on any more strength, if he can kind of, because he's tall, he's 6'5". If Steph Curry can be a solid team defender at his size, there's no reason Jordan Poole can't as well with his intelligence and his frame. So he's an interesting guy. And the finals, I'd say he's probably, underwhelmed a little bit, but I think going into the finals, people thought it might be a series where he would struggle, and he's still at least been able to play. And in the past particular games, especially, has gotten it going more offensively.
Poole is an amazing swing guy, like so creative, such a talented live dribbler, so far from a Steph clone, but there are just moments where you're like, wait, so now Poole can hit someone with a hezzy step back from 30 feet and like turn around as it's in the air, because there aren't many guys in the league that can have some of the ceiling moments that Poole has on offense.
Yeah. And both he and Steph also have this like ability to just string dribble moves together until there's the proper angle to be able to get a step into the paint. And he has a great first step as well. That's not something that I saw pop up in the report that I read, but his ability to just he looks like he's kind of dribbling himself into nowhere, and then suddenly he's at the rim for like a little reverse pivot layup. And his footwork has gotten really good as well. His footwork as well as his ball handling. So yeah, I mean, props to him for just continuing to improving. Everyone talks about that sort of period when everyone else was in the bubble, and he worked on his game a ton because the Warriors were so bad that year they weren't invited.
But yeah, I mean, if you ask my little brother who went to Michigan, like who watched a lot of live Jordan Poole, like he was just a guy who would get a bucket. He was a good shooter. He'd get you a bucket. He didn't show you a ton of other skills. You know, there are a lot of good shooters in the draft these days, but evidently he was one worth jumping on. One of the best scouting misses, one of the best finds in NBA draft history. Michigan State senior, drafted 5th in the second round, 35 overall, Draymond Green of Saginaw, Michigan.
Comped to Luke Herringody and Jared Dudley. It's it's kind of wild reading the report, because I mean, I remember just watching him as a rookie. I was hearing some player talk about, I think it was JJ Redick. He was talking about seeing Draymond Green as a rookie and being like, what does he do?
Yeah.
Like, he was definitely overweight, and he totally remade his body before Steve Kerr's first year in 2015. And from what I saw in the scouting report, I think people scouted his offense pretty well, but they just had no idea that he would turn into a Hall of Fame defender and the best defender of his generation. So yeah, I mean, the things I saw: ultimate glue guy, unafraid to bang with bigger bodies. Shout out Charles Barkley. Good looking shooter with feet set. That one, maybe not so much. I don't know if he still had the backpack on in college or if he put that on when he came to the NBA.
He was born with the backpack.
He was born with the backpack. Good facilitating. Yeah, I mean, that's been like his key skill on offense.
Yeah.
And basically he was kind of classified as a jack of all trades, master of none, which on offense to some degree is accurate, I would say.
Yeah. Vulnerable, defending quicker guards on the perimeter.
Yep.
I remember watching him play on a big military ship against, it was like a special college basketball event. He played for Michigan State on a boat against North Carolina. And I think North Carolina won that game. He was playing against Harrison Barnes's team, but Draymond was just the ultimate glue guy. He had a thunderous two-handed dunk. He was always a little bit more explosive than I expected. And he was really just like the anchor for that Tom Izzo team. Played a lot of 5 for them, foreshadowing the role that he would thrive in the NBA, because when he first got to the Warriors, they were playing him more on the wing. And as you said, he looked a little lost in that role. Not a great shooter, not an awesome ball handler for a 3, but always had an incredibly high IQ, always knew how to find open shooters from the paint, and a great screener, and put everything he had into becoming an elite defender. And he was already a good defensive prospect and became one of the best defenders ever as a pro.
Yeah. I mean, the Hall of Fame level defensive transformation is just, I mean, from the guy that you see at Michigan State, I guess that was impossible to see coming, but maybe they also didn't factor in enough kind of the ultimate competitor fire and desire element as well, because I mean, that's got to be his other defining characteristic is his fire and his heart, and that kind of being the driving force that made him into a Hall of Fame defender, along with his long arms and his strong base and good sense of balance and defensive intelligence. But yeah, I mean, that feels like one that's not very replicable. Like, yeah, when you see guys compared to Draymond Green coming out of college, it's like, we haven't really seen that before. Yeah. So I don't know if I believe you.
Scouts started doing it year after year after Draymond emerged for the Warriors. Every thick, strong-willed defender, trash talker is a Draymond comp now. Yeah. Shout out Jayshawn Tate. But yeah, Draymond's ceiling was drastically underestimated. I think he was seen as a high floor, low ceiling guy. And he turned out to have an extremely high ceiling.
Yeah.
I think of the Warriors dynasty core, he is the guy with like the craziest variability in terms of like he gets drafted by another team. I don't know what the hell his career looks like.
Yeah. He might not be motivated to lose 30 pounds
Yeah.
if he gets drafted to the Bucks at that time or something, or the
And
Pistons.
and his synergy with Steph is so special. Steph and Clay unlocked him as a passer in a way that I don't know we would have seen on 29 other franchises. So this was just like star-crossed. He ends up on the Warriors. He becomes a true 1 through 5 defender. He is the grit that makes the Warriors finesse good enough to get you a title. He's the spine of that dynasty.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's one of those prospect outcomes where, you know, you can't fault the teams that didn't select him. However, I take a lot of credit for this one. I picked Michigan State to win the national title, both his junior and senior years, because I was completely in love with him. I did not think he would be this kind of pro, but I was just, I thought I want to bet on the team that has that maniac on the floor, because he was always chirping. He was always pushing refs' limits, and he was always winning. All right, let's get to the one that we won't even be good at talking about because Steph is Steph. Davidson Jr., 2009, number 7 overall, compared on NBA DraftNet to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, who, according to my dad, was just an incredible shooter. And I played with him in 2K My Team, and he drains threes, but he's not Steph.
I remember at a high school coach when Steph was starting his run that was like, oh, you guys think we've never seen a great shooter before? Like, you should look up Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf.
Yeah, LSU legend. I think his name was Chris Johnson.
Jackson, I think.
Chris Jackson. Okay.
Yeah. Here we go. The most interesting aspect of Curry as an NBA prospect is how different his role will be in the league. At Davidson this past season, everything around the Wildcats offense was centered around Curry and his ability to create, both for himself and for his teammates. Another quote, in the NBA, Curry is going to play a much more marginal role. So those didn't exactly pan out. But another one that did pan out, as pure a stroke as I've ever seen, automatic out to about 30 feet. At the time, shooting was just seen as like another thing. Like, yeah, you know, not a great defender, good shooter, pretty good ball handler. Like, they're all even. But
yeah,
partially as a result of, or almost largely as a result of Steph, shooting has become the thing. And if you tell someone they're going to be the greatest shooter of all time, that's like an easy number 1 pick. But at the time, if he's like, oh, he might be the greatest shooter of all time, it's like, but he's a little undersized. Maybe he's like the 5th best guy.
Yeah.
So
nobody had potential game breaker down in their scouting report.
No, probably more of a combo 2 than a pure point. First step leaves much to be desired, but very good handle. Like, yeah, I think they just couldn't envision what he would do to the league. Because for the first few years of his career, he was good and he was injured a lot, but no one thought he was going to be an MVP or anything like that.
Yeah, he was in a bit of a wasteland over there out west. He had a Monte year. He had 2 years before they drafted Clay, where they were a losing team, and he was a really good shooter, but still so frail. I think the interesting recurring theme in the scouting reports that I read was just like he transitioned from shooting guard to point guard his junior year at Davidson. And we are worried that he is just not a point guard. He's a shooting guard at heart. And, he might be able to get guys involved, a la, what was it, Bibby?
I found one that said, best case, Mike Bibby.
Yes.
Worst case, Gennaro Pargo, Steve Kerr, JJ Redick.
Yeah. So they just really doubted his ability to facilitate an offense. Yeah. I guess what we all missed was that nobody has a point guard anymore in this NBA. Point guards are scorers. If your lead guard isn't a scoring threat, you're in trouble in the vast majority of cases. Steph has always been a combo guard. I don't feel comfortable listing him as one of the best point guards ever because I just feel like he's one of the best guards ever. Yeah. And when I think of point guards, I think of the more pure floor generals, Chris Paul, Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, those guys who genuinely feel like their first job is to keep the gears moving in the machine that is their offense. But none of that matters because, like you said, best shooter ever by far, drastically altered the geometry of every basketball game that he's ever been a part of.
Shout out to Steve Kerr for realizing kind of the chaos that Curry created just by running around.
Yeah.
And one of my biggest pet peeves is when Warriors fans complain about Steve Kerr, because like they wouldn't be in this position without him. I don't think. Like
Yeah.
I don't if I mean Mark Jackson did what he could to get them to like a playoff team, but without like this revolutionary system that just basically leveraged chaos, and the chaos that comes from Steph Curry and to a lesser degree, but still a lot, Klay Thompson running around and the defense freaking out about them having a sliver of daylight, and all the openings that opens up for everyone else, and how Draymond is perfectly suited to pounce on those openings. Like that is just great coaching to your players' strengths, in a way that, in a system really that was a blending of several different systems, but looks nothing like anything that we've seen before. So big shout out to Steve Kerr for that, who worst case scenario for Steph Curry was Steve Kerr.
One thing that surprised me looking at Steph's college stats, he shoots 10.3 threes per game his junior year at Davidson. He actually didn't shoot more than 8 threes a game in the NBA in a longer game, better spacing, until Steve Kerr got there in 2014, when Steph basically started shooting 10 threes per game for the rest of his career. Yeah. Steve Kerr empowered him to take his unprecedented shooting to a whole nother level, just blow the roof off this skill that you have and change the course of NBA history. So yeah, that is Steph. And
for a guy who changed the course of NBA history, I was reading Gavoni's draft night blog from 2009.
Yeah.
And he was very surprised that the Warriors took Curry over Jordan Hill, which as a Knicks fan is just a knife to the heart. And also talked about just how crushed the Curry family looked when the Warriors picked them when the Knicks were the next pick.
What we also underestimated defensively was just like, it really matters where you are positioned on the floor. Mm-hmm. And stunting off ball, and knowing if you just are a body with your hands up in certain places, you can make up for a lack of size, length. So Curry's know-how, he also has put on so much muscle in the last few years. He doesn't look like the baby-faced killer he was at Davidson. Yeah. Still has the baby face, but he's a grown man now, and so far from the defensive liability that guys like Trey and Donovan, other high-powered smaller guards, have been in recent memory. Before we close this out, let's hit on a couple of the role guys on this incredible roster.
Some role sprinkles.
Yeah, a few sprinkles. So we got the undrafted Oregon State 2-year guy. I say 2 years, not sophomore, because he came through Salt Lake City Community College before he was an Oregon State Beaver. Gary Payton II.
So honestly, I think the scouting report was spot on with him. It was just that he needed the perfect system for himself to become a useful NBA player, because he's basically a 5 on offense, and then on defense, someone who can guard point guards, shooting guards, small forwards. And I mean, everyone identified his impressive physical tools, which anyone who's seen him dunk this year and scratch his head knows about. Great rebounder and defender, disruptive, good at finishing offensively, not so much outside the paint, not a prolific distributor, jump shot, no good.
Under 30% at Oregon State.
Yeah.
From 3.
There's not much to add to that scouting report. Like that basically describes the player that he is. Maybe they didn't quite put enough stock into just how good of a defender he is, where like he might be the best guard defender in the whole NBA, him or Drew Holiday. Yeah. And Marcus Smart, I guess, but he's in that class, and he's in the class where people debate whether he or his dad, the Glove, was actually a better defender. I didn't watch the original Glove, obviously, but it just speaks to, I think, again, I don't know if it's the Warriors system being able to just like fitting his skill set very well, or Steve Kerr and that staff just knowing how to look at what he can do and see that even though he's a non-shooting point guard nominally, they can still figure out ways for him to be useful, because he's so dynamic and he can still handle the ball a little bit and is so disruptive defensively that it opens up a lot of stuff for the team. And he's been a huge key to this series. Like they look like a feistier and different team in the games that he's played compared to game 1 and parts of that Dallas series where they didn't have him. Yeah, he's been a great story this year, and I'm happy that he got to come back from breaking his elbow to actually play meaningful minutes in the finals.
Unfortunately, he's broken out as a 29-year-old. sort of reminiscent of Isaiah Thomas's like late blooming in the NBA. It'll be interesting to see how much money he can max out at, before he is past his prime here. But yeah, it's just really about the shooting becoming respectable enough, because when you're 6'2.5" in shoes and you're not a real point guard, you got to be able to hit a catch and shoot three. And he's become competent enough that his elite defense is more than worth having him out there for this team. And he sort of has some like Steph of the post moments where like he's so good at finding space inside, and he's a better under the rim finisher than Draymond, it seems.
He gets up to the backboard so fast.
Yeah.
Like he'll get it and Robert Williams will be closing, but he'll just jump so fast and get it on the board that, you can't touch it without goaltending it, that it's really, I mean, the burst is incredible. He's one of the more athletic point guards we've seen recently.
Defenses swarm the Warriors' perimeter actions, and he just has a knack for finding space inside off the Draymond short roll. We don't need to waste your time with UCLA freshman. I think it was 2015 Kayvon Looney. He was a top high school prospect. Weird guy, just turned out to be an incredible rebounder and intelligent defender. But yeah, I think we went through the most relevant Warriors, and it's just fun as we approach the 2022 draft to look at the way these guys were perceived as young prospects. Thank you so much for listening. Shout out Yusuf, shout out Waltman, shout out Micah. Thanks to everyone who takes the time to listen to us.
Draft content coming your way. We've been working very hard on developing our takes and opinions on some of these prospects. And we do have some stuff that is off the mainstream. So excited to get into that.
Yeah. Max has fallen hard for EJ Liddell. I have fallen hard for Ben Mathurin. More to come. Peace.